Before God and every noble in England, the Duke turned his back on his bride, declaring she would never have his heart. At the banquet table, the rival lord stood and sneered, "She is wasted on a man who dishonors her." Laughter and whispers spread like wildfire, eyes burning into the Duchess. She waited, trembling, for her husband to rise and silence the insult, but he said nothing. He let her suffer. That night she thought of leaving Ashbourne forever, until a twist no one saw coming bound their lives in ways that would change everything.
The storm had rolled in with the evening, low clouds pressing against the horizon as though the very heavens sought to witness the scandal about to unfold. Lightning split the sky above Ashbourne Estate, illuminating the sprawling halls of stone and glass. The carriages had arrived one by one, filling the courtyard with the shimmer of jewels, the rustle of gowns, and the murmur of England's most powerful nobles. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with chandeliers, their light catching on polished marble and gilded arches. It was meant to be a night of union, of triumph, of two houses bound together for strength and survival. Instead, it became a night carved into memory for cruelty. Eliana stood at the center of it all, her ivory gown trailing across the floor like spilled moonlight. Every stitch had been chosen carefully, meant to remind the court that though her family had fallen on hard times, she still carried the dignity of her bloodline. Her heart thudded beneath the pearl buttons, a rhythm of fear and fragile hope. She had agreed to this marriage not for love, but for the safety of her kin. Tonight was meant to secure their future, to protect her mother and brothers from the crushing hand of poverty. The council had chosen her precisely because her family's lands, though diminished, still controlled key trade routes, and binding her to Ashbourne would preserve political balance. She told herself she could endure whatever the Duke brought, so long as their survival was bought with her silence. And then he entered. Mitchell, Duke of Ashbourne, was a man carved from shadows and pride. His broad shoulders filled the doorway, the black velvet of his coat gleaming under the candlelight. His eyes, cold as winter steel, swept across the room not with warmth or welcome, but with disdain. A murmur rippled through the crowd as he strode forward. Some bowed their heads out of respect, others whispered of his cruelty, but all felt the weight of his presence. To them, he was the council's pawn, shackled into marriage for alliance. To him, it was nothing more than proof of his lost freedom, forced into a union he despised to secure loyalties he had never asked for. The ceremony had been short, brisk, and devoid of tenderness. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and yet no touch lingered between them. Now, as the musicians struck up a triumphant tune, all eyes turned to the Duke, waiting for him to take his bride into his arms for the first dance. Eliana's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, silently begging for some sign of mercy, some glimmer of the man behind the reputation. But Mitchell only sneered. Before the entire gathering of nobles, he stepped back. "This union," he said, his voice carrying across the hall, "is nothing but politics. Do not mistake it for affection. She will never hold my heart." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Fans snapped shut, gloves rustled, and whispers surged like a wave against marble walls. Eliana's face remained composed, the corners of her lips frozen into a delicate smile, but her soul trembled. Inside her chest, the fragile hope she had nursed shattered into pieces. The musicians faltered, strings whining before falling into silence. The Duke turned from her without a glance, presenting his back to the bride he had just dishonored. To him, this was victory, a declaration of power, a rebellion against the council that had forced his hand. To her, it was the beginning of exile within her own marriage. The nobles did not hide their whispers. The poor girl. "Did you hear?" He humiliated her already. A duchess in name, but nothing more. Their eyes cut into her like blades. Eliana's hands tightened on her skirts, nails biting into her palms. She had been prepared for coldness, even cruelty, but not this public humiliation. And yet, she refused to fall apart. Lifting her chin, she allowed herself a single breath. She straightened her shoulders and met their stares with unyielding calm. If he wished to strip her of dignity, she would not grant him the satisfaction of watching her crumble. Her silence became her shield, her poise the only weapon left to her. Mitchell, turning to address his allies, caught the faint glimmer of defiance in her eyes. For a moment, just a flicker, he felt something stir, something unwanted. He crushed it quickly, locking it behind his pride. He told himself she was nothing, a chain placed on him by politics, not a woman worthy of regard. And yet, the sight of her standing tall despite his cruelty left a bitter taste in his mouth. The storm outside raged louder, thunder shaking the window panes as if echoing the turmoil inside. Servants whispered at the edges of the hall. Some pitied the Duchess, others feared the Duke's wrath. Clarine, Eliana's maid, lingered in the shadows, her heart aching for the young woman who had entered marriage with hope and now found only shame. The evening continued in hollow fragments. Mitchell ignored his bride, entertaining guests with sharp words and colder smiles. Eliana drifted like a ghost through her own celebration, every step a battle not to betray the ache in her chest. Her family sat at the edge of the room, faces pale, knowing too well the cost of her endurance. As the storm broke over the estate, rain lashed against the windows. Lightning illuminated the ballroom in sudden flashes, casting long shadows that seemed to swallow the night. Eliana stood alone near the grand hearth, her reflection trembling in the glass. She wondered if this was to be her life. Silence, humiliation, endurance. Whispers continued to swirl around her. She should have known better. No woman can change him. This marriage is doomed. Each word pressed against her ribs like iron bars, yet she clung to composure. For her family, she would endure. For their survival, she would not break. But deep within, beneath the layers of strength, something fragile whispered that she deserved more than endurance. And across the hall, though he would not admit it, Mitchell felt a strange unease coil through him. Triumph should have filled him after such a public declaration, yet instead he felt the faint sting of isolation. His cruelty had silenced the court, but in silencing them he had only deepened his own solitude. The night ended not with celebration, but with fractures carved deep into the hearts of bride and groom. One humiliated yet unbroken, the other triumphant yet hollow. The storm rolled on, and so began a marriage forged not in love, but in defiance, a bond that would test the limits of dignity, pride, and desire. If you were publicly humiliated on your wedding night, would you fight back or endure in silence? The storm had passed by morning, leaving the grounds of Ashbourne washed in silver dew. Servants bustled through the corridors, carrying trays and opening shutters, but within the chambers of the Duchess there was only stillness. Eliana sat by the tall windows, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though her nails pressed crescents into her palms. Beyond the glass, the gardens sprawled in careful symmetry, roses climbing trellises, fountains catching the weak autumn light. It should have been beautiful, it should have been hers to claim as home, yet to her it felt borrowed, a kingdom she would never truly belong to. Her reflection in the glass betrayed the truth she fought to hide. The faint shadows under her eyes, the tightness of her mouth, the silence in her gaze. She thought of her mother's frail hands clutching hers before the wedding. Endure, my darling. Whatever he is, whatever he does, endure. For us. Her younger brothers depended on the dowry secured by this union. Without it, their family estate would have fallen to ruin, swallowed by creditors. She had chosen this marriage because she could not bear to see them broken, could not watch her mother fade into poverty. So she had traded her own freedom for their survival, binding herself to a man who had sworn, before half the nobility of England, that she would never touch his heart. Yet still she stayed. Clarine entered quietly, her dark skirts whispering against the stone floor. She carried a tray with bread and tea, though her eyes spoke more than her hands. "You should eat, my lady," she murmured, setting it down beside her mistress. Eliana managed a faint smile. "If I eat, will it make me less of a ghost in this house?" Her voice was soft, but her bitterness startled even herself. Clarine touched her shoulder gently. "A ghost does not hold her head as high as you did last night. They think you are broken, but you are not. You are still here." Eliana's throat tightened. She wanted to believe it, yet doubts gnawed at her heart. Was she worthy of respect when even her husband would not claim her? Far across the estate, in the west wing that he had claimed for himself, Mitchell stood before a fire. The flames painted harsh lines across his face, his jaw set with unyielding pride. Lawrence, his adviser, lingered at his side, parchment in hand. "You made quite the spectacle," Lawrence said carefully, though admiration laced his tone. "The court will not forget it. They will know you bend to no one, not even the council." Mitchell's lips curved into a grim smile. That was the intention. Let them whisper. Let them know I cannot be controlled. His voice was iron, yet beneath it flickered an ember of unease. He had seen Eliana's eyes last night, steady, unbroken. He had expected tears collapse, the usual weakness he despised. Instead, she had endured in silence, and it had unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Lawrence continued, "Still, appearances must be maintained. You cannot let her become an object of pity for too long. It reflects poorly on your strength." Mitchell waved a hand dismissively. "She is irrelevant, a pawn placed in my path. I owe her nothing." But even as he spoke, his fingers brushed the locket hidden beneath his shirt, a relic of his youth. Inside lay the face of the woman who had betrayed him, choosing another man's wealth over his devotion. That wound had never healed. Every smile he saw, every promise whispered by women in silk, carried the echo of that betrayal. Eliana was no different. She would only seek advantage, just as the others had. He would never allow himself to be deceived again. That afternoon, the estate came alive with visitors eager to gossip about the scandal of the wedding night. Donovan arrived among them, a lord with easy charm and an ambitious glint in his eyes. His smile was quick, his laughter effortless, and he had the rare gift of making others feel seen. When he approached Eliana, bowing with a flourish, she felt the eyes of the court upon her. "My lady," he said smoothly, "you carry yourself with remarkable grace, considering—" He let the sentence dangle, baiting her to acknowledge the humiliation she had suffered. Eliana held his gaze steadily, refusing to let the pity in his tone pierce her. "Considering I am a wife now, yes, grace is demanded of me." Donovan's eyes flickered with intrigue. Here was no broken bride, but a woman of quiet strength. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Your husband is a fool not to see it. Some men only recognize treasure when it is already in another's hands." His words were laced with more than courtesy. Clarine, standing near, stiffened at his forwardness. From across the room, Mitchell watched, his jaw tightening. He told himself it was annoyance. Donovan was his rival, always circling, always seeking advantage. Yet as he saw Donovan's attention fixed on Eliana, saw her receive his words with calm composure, a sharp, unwelcome jealousy cut through him. He turned away quickly, unwilling to confront what it meant. That evening, as the guests dispersed, Eliana retreated to her chambers. Clarine followed, whispering, "The Lord meant to flatter you, but it was dangerous." Eliana sank onto the edge of her bed, exhaustion pressing against her bones. Dangerous, yes, but for whom? For him or for me? I will not be traded from one man's pride to another's ambition. Clarine took her hands firm and steady. "You are more than a pawn, my lady, more than a tool for their games." Eliana's voice faltered, low with the weight of truth. "But what if I am not? What if my only worth is what this marriage provides for my family? I chose to stay, Clarine. I chose this prison because at least behind its bars my mother eats and my brothers sleep without fear of hunger." Her words broke something in the room, the echo of resignation settling heavy in the air. Clarine squeezed her hands, unwilling to let despair take root. "You are more, Eliana. You will see it, even if he never does." Meanwhile, in the Duke's private study, Lawrence pressed his point again after what he had noticed. "You cannot allow Donovan to circle unchecked. If you do not guard your Duchess, others will." Mitchell's response was cold. "Let him circle. If she is foolish enough to believe his honeyed words, Then she will prove herself no different than the rest. But alone, with only the firelight and the weight of silence, Mitchell felt a faint unease creep beneath his armor. He could still see her at the ball. Her chin lifted, her gaze steady despite the whispers. She had not shattered as he had expected. She endured, and though he despised himself for noticing, that endurance had power. The night drew long. Eliana lay awake, staring at the carved ceiling of her chamber, wondering what her life would become. She had chosen this path for her family, but each day it demanded more of her spirit. Still, she would not give her enemies the pleasure of seeing her broken. If dignity was all she could cling to, then she would wield it like a crown. And somewhere in the house Mitchell wrestled with his ghosts, telling himself he felt nothing, even as her quiet defiance unsettled his pride. Do you believe dignity can be more powerful than revenge? The days that followed the scandalous wedding were heavy with silence. Whispers trailed through the corridors of Ashbourne Estate, carried by servants who dared not speak too loudly, yet could not resist the temptation of gossip. Eliana walked among them with measured steps, her chin lifted, but inside her chest an ache deepened. Each glance she caught, each hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when she entered a room, reminded her of her humiliation. She told herself she could endure it, she must endure it, for her family. Yet every hour tested her resolve. The summons to a grand ball came sooner than she expected. The invitation bore the seal of Lord Whitmore, a man known for opulence, and Clarine's voice trembled as she read it aloud. "They mean to see you," her maid whispered, setting the parchment down. "They mean to weigh you like a curiosity, my lady." Eliana's throat tightened. She knew Clarine was right. The nobility would gather not simply to honor tradition, but to witness the Duchess who had been dishonored on her own wedding night. They would look to see whether she was meek or defiant, broken or unyielding. She swallowed the sting of dread and whispered back, "Then let them see." When the night arrived, the Whitmore estate glowed with hundreds of candles, their flames reflected in crystal chandeliers. The carriages stretched in a gleaming line, carrying the finest of England's aristocracy. Eliana stepped out in a gown of deep sapphire, the fabric flowing like liquid midnight, her hair adorned with pearls. She had chosen the color deliberately, somber yet regal, as if to say she would not fade into shadows. At her side walked Mitchell, austere in black, his expression carved from stone. His arm offered no comfort. It was an empty formality, a chain disguised as courtesy. The ballroom erupted in murmurs as they entered. Eliana felt the weight of 100 eyes sweep across her. She smiled faintly, though her heart thudded, each beat a reminder that she was not here for herself, but for the fragile survival of her kin. She would not falter. Music swelled, couples took to the floor, and soon the Duke drifted toward his circle of allies, leaving Eliana momentarily alone. That was when Donovan approached. He was tall, with dark hair that gleamed in the candlelight and a smile that seemed designed to disarm. His bow was low, his voice smooth as silk. "Your Grace," he said, his gaze lingering not with pity, but with admiration. "The room pales beside you tonight." The words caught her off guard. She had grown accustomed to whispers that cut, not words that flattered. She studied him, wary, but his eyes held a warmth she had not seen since her marriage began. "You are kind to say so," she answered, her voice steady though suspicion stirred in her. Donovan tilted his head. "Kind? No. Honest. One wonders if your husband is blind, for how else could he overlook what stands before him?" His voice was pitched low, intimate enough that only she could hear, yet she sensed the watching eyes of the court. Heat rose in her cheeks, not from flattery, but from the danger of his boldness. Across the hall, Mitchell stiffened. He had been engaged in clipped conversation with Lawrence and 2 other nobles, but his gaze caught the sight of Donovan leaning close to Eliana. He saw the smile on Donovan's lips, the faint flush on Eliana's cheeks. A sharp, unfamiliar sting pierced him. Jealousy. He despised the word, despised even more the sensation curling through his chest like fire. His jaw clenched as Lawrence murmured, "Do not react, my lord. To show jealousy is to show weakness," but Mitchell's eyes could not leave them. Donovan extended his hand. "Will you honor me with a dance, my lady?" Eliana hesitated. She felt the gaze of the court pressing down upon her. To accept would spark whispers, to refuse would mark her as cold. But worse, she feared the trap of becoming another man's pawn, this time dressed in charm instead of cruelty. Before she could decide, Mitchell was suddenly beside her. "She does not dance tonight," the Duke said, his tone a blade of ice. His hand rested at the small of her back, possessive and firm, though his eyes never met hers. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd. Donovan's smile sharpened. How unfortunate. A bride at her first ball should be celebrated, not hidden away. His words carried just enough bite to be overheard. Gasps and murmurs swelled. Mitchell's eyes narrowed, his voice low with threat. "Careful, Donovan. You trespass on dangerous ground." Eliana's heart pounded. She felt caught between wolves, one who claimed her with disdain, another who sought her with ambition. She longed to vanish into the walls, yet she held her composure, refusing to show the turmoil within. Donovan bowed again, though his eyes gleamed with challenge. "I meant no disrespect, Your Grace, merely compassion, for it pains me to see beauty so cruelly neglected." With that, he stepped back, leaving a trail of whispers in his wake. The ball resumed, but the air had changed. Mitchell remained at Eliana's side, his touch lingering not out of tenderness, but out of warning. Yet beneath his pride, his mind seethed. He had thought her irrelevant, a chain forced upon him. But the thought of Donovan's hand upon her, Donovan's gaze drinking her in, it burned. Later, as the carriages departed and the night drew to a close, Donovan lingered in the shadows near the entrance. When Mitchell approached with Eliana on his arm, Donovan stepped forward, bowing with exaggerated grace. His voice carried just enough for Mitchell to hear, though his eyes never left Eliana. "If ever you tire of living in the shadow of neglect, my lady, know that there are those who would gladly offer you light." The words struck like a spark in dry tinder. Mitchell's grip tightened on Eliana's arm, his voice dangerously low. "You presume too much." Donovan smiled, unflinching. "I presume only what is plain for all to see. A duchess deserves more than a title. She deserves devotion, and I will not stand idle while she is cast aside." His gaze locked with Mitchell's, the challenge clear. In that moment the rivalry was born. Eliana, caught between them, felt the ground shift beneath her. She resented Mitchell's cruelty, but Donovan's attention unsettled her even more. She was no one's prize, no one's pawn. Yet already she was caught in the game of powerful men who saw her as both weakness and weapon. Her heart whispered for escape, but her duty chained her here. As the carriage carried them back to Ashbourne, silence hung heavy. Mitchell stared into the night, his thoughts a storm. He despised Donovan, despised the way he looked at her. But what unsettled him most was the realization gnawing at his pride. For the first time, the Duchess he had scorned mattered to him, and Eliana, sitting across from him, folded her hands tightly in her lap. She knew one truth above all others. This was only the beginning. If you were trapped between a cruel husband and a charming rival who promised rescue, who would you trust, neither one or both? The night after the Whitmore ball left a heaviness in Ashbourne Estate. Whispers clung to the walls, and servants moved more cautiously, aware of the Duke's foul mood. Mitchell had spoken little on the ride home, though the tension in his posture filled the carriage like smoke. Eliana, across from him, had stared at her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face serene though her heart pounded with conflicting emotions. She despised his cruelty, yet Donovan's boldness frightened her. She wanted neither man's claim, yet she felt their shadows pressing in on every side. When the next invitation arrived, from the Duchess of Hartwell, renowned for her sharp tongue and her gatherings filled with intrigue, Eliana knew refusal was not an option. Mitchell was determined to attend, for to retreat would be to give Donovan ground. The Hartwell ballroom was smaller but glittering, every corner alive with the shimmer of jewels and the scent of roses. Music spilled from a quartet, mingling with the clink of goblets. Eliana entered on Mitchell's arm, her gown of soft silver catching the candlelight. She felt every gaze upon her, curious, probing, measuring. She walked tall, even as the memory of her wedding night still haunted her. It did not take long for Donovan to appear. He crossed the floor with his easy grace, bowing low before her. "Your Grace, once again, you outshine the room itself." His eyes lingered too long, his smile too warm. Mitchell's hand closed at her waist, guiding her firmly away. "She is already spoken for," Mitchell said coolly, his voice carrying just enough to silence the circle around them. Donovan's smile sharpened, but he bowed out with a mocking glint in his eye. Eliana felt the pressure of Mitchell's touch, possessive, almost protective. But it was not tenderness. It was warning, a statement to the court that she was his possession, even if unloved. The evening wore on, and Eliana felt the weight of scrutiny. Near the refreshment table, a cluster of noblewomen whispered, their voices dripping with disdain. One, Lady Penhurst smirked loudly enough to be heard, "A duchess who cannot hold her husband's gaze, what is she but a title without substance?" Laughter rippled cruelly through the group. Eliana froze, her spine rigid. The old doubt pressed hard. Was she truly nothing more than a pawn? Before she could decide whether to answer or retreat, Mitchell's shadow fell over them. His voice was low, cutting. "Be careful, Lady Penhurst. Titles without substance are dangerous things to mock, especially when yours rests solely on your husband's fortune." The laughter died instantly. Faces paled, fans snapped shut, and the women scurried back into the crowd. Eliana turned toward Mitchell, shock and confusion mingling in her chest. He had defended her publicly, decisively. It was not affection, she told herself. It was his pride, unwilling to let anyone else cast scorn on what belonged to him. And yet the flicker of heat in her chest would not be smothered. Later she found herself at the edge of the ballroom, seeking air near a window. Mitchell appeared beside her, silent at first, his gaze fixed on the dancers. The tension between them vibrated like a drawn bowstring. "You need not defend me," Eliana said at last, her voice low but steady. His eyes shifted to her, sharp as steel. "Do you think I would allow them to tear down what is mine?" Her chest tightened. "Yours?" She turned to face him fully, her chin lifted. "Am I nothing but a possession, to be claimed or ignored as you choose?" The air between them crackled. Mitchell's jaw flexed. "Would you rather belong to Donovan?" The name struck like a slap. Her breath caught, her anger rising. "I belong to no man, not to him and not to you." For a moment, silence held them captive, broken only by the distant swell of violins. Then Mitchell stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You wear my name. You carry my title. Whether you like it or not, you are mine." Heat surged in her veins, half fury, half something she could not name. She wanted to strike him, to claw through his pride, yet her body betrayed her, trembling with the nearness of him. His gaze lingered on her lips for a fraction too long, and she saw it, cracks in the armor he wore, something raw and dangerous beneath. Eliana forced herself to step back, breaking the spell. "You may chain me with duty, but you will never command my heart." The words stung him more than he expected. For a heartbeat he faltered, something wounded flickering in his eyes before pride buried it. He turned away, cold once more, though the storm inside him raged. The carriage ride home was silence edged with unspoken words. Eliana stared out at the rain-slick streets, her chest tight with confusion. She despised his cruelty, yet his defense of her haunted her. She saw the man everyone called ruthless. Yet beneath that she glimpsed something else, something she was determined not to acknowledge. Mitchell, across from her, watched the faint tremor in her hands, the way her jaw clenched, as if she fought herself as much as him. He despised Donovan, despised the idea of losing her to another. And yet he despised most of all the realization gnawing at his pride. He wanted her, not as possession, not as trophy, but in ways he had sworn never to feel again. Neither spoke, but the tension between them filled the carriage, thick and heavy, every breath charged. When they reached Ashbourne, Eliana climbed the steps swiftly, her silver skirts whispering against the stone. Mitchell lingered at the doorway, watching her disappear into the halls. His hands curled into fists. He had spent years walling his heart in ice, but the Duchess he had dishonored was tearing through his defenses, piece by piece, and she refused to surrender to him no matter what her heart whispered in the dark. The storm between them had only begun. If someone defended your honor but treated you like a possession, would you feel grateful or enraged? Ashbourne had grown quieter in the days after the Hartwell gathering, but the silence was no less tense. Eliana moved through the manor's endless halls with poise, though inside she carried 1,000 restless questions. Mitchell's sudden defense of her still echoed in her heart, cutting through the memory of his humiliation, his cruelty, and his unyielding pride. For the first time, she had glimpsed something beyond the cold armor he wore. She despised herself for noticing it, and yet she could not let it go. One evening, unable to sleep, she wandered the dim corridors of the West Wing. The storm outside pressed against the windows, rain streaking down the glass. Her slippers whispered against the floor as she passed closed doors until a faint glow caught her eye. Light spilled from beneath the Duke's study door. The temptation to walk away was strong. She had no business intruding upon his solitude, yet curiosity tugged at her. Quiet as breath, she pressed the latch and stepped inside. The room smelled of leather and smoke, the shelves lined with tomes and ledgers. Mitchell sat at his desk, a decanter of brandy at his elbow, papers scattered across the surface. But it was not the papers that held his attention, it was a small silver locket in his hands. He turned it over slowly, his expression shadowed, his usually hard features softened with something Eliana had never seen there before. She froze. The floor creaked faintly under her weight. Mitchell's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing, cold fury rising like a blade. "What are you doing here?" Eliana's heart thudded, but she forced herself forward, her chin lifted. "I could not sleep. I saw the light." Her gaze flicked to the locket before she could stop herself. "What is that?" Mitchell's jaw tightened. He closed his fist around it, rising to his feet. "None of your concern." Her voice, quiet but firm, cut through the air. "Then why do you hide it?" The words struck him, stirring something raw. He moved toward her, his steps deliberate, his fury laced with something deeper. "You think because you bear my name you have the right to pry into my life?" His voice cracked with anger. "You who were forced upon me. Do not mistake endurance for intimacy, Eliana." Her name on his tongue sent a shiver through her, yet she did not retreat. "You dishonored me before them all, you scorn me, mock me, and yet you keep secrets that chain you far more than I ever could. What is it that binds you so tightly?" His chest rose and fell sharply. For a moment he looked ready to strike her with words that would cut, but then his hand opened, revealing the locket. He snapped it open with a flick, holding it out to her. Inside lay a miniature portrait of a woman, painted with delicate strokes. Her smile was soft, her eyes warm. "She chose another," he spat, bitterness dripping from every syllable. "She promised me her heart, and then she sold it for gold. I was young, a fool, and I believed love could withstand ambition. She proved me wrong. Every vow, every tender word. Lies." He snapped the locket shut with finality, the sound sharp in the quiet. "So do not ask why I despise this union, why I will never give you what you crave. Love is a weapon, Eliana, and I will never be cut by it again." Eliana's throat ached. She expected to feel triumph at seeing him wounded, but instead she felt the weight of his pain settle heavy upon her chest. He stood before her, proud and broken, a man imprisoned by betrayal. And for the first time she understood. His cruelty was not born from her, but from scars long before she entered his life. She stepped closer, her voice steady though her heart raced. "Not every woman is her." His eyes flared, anger warring with something else. "You think you are different, that you will not betray me as she did. Do not pretend your family's desperation did not bring you to me. You chose survival, not me." Her breath caught. He had struck true, but she did not flinch. "Yes, I chose survival, I chose my family, but do you think that makes me false? My sacrifices do not make me faithless." For a heartbeat, silence bound them. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing across his face, revealing the torment in his eyes. She felt the air between them shift, charged, dangerous. He stepped closer. Their breaths mingled. His hand lifted, almost without his consent, brushing a loose strand of hair from her cheek. She trembled, her pulse hammering, her body betraying her resolve. His gaze dropped to her lips. It would have taken nothing at all, for the space between them to vanish. Her breath hitched as she swayed closer, the world narrowing to his warmth, his scent, the fire in his eyes. Then, with a shudder, she stepped back. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking with the effort. Mitchell's hand dropped to his side, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. He turned away sharply, pouring himself another glass of brandy, though his hands shook faintly. "Leave," he rasped. Eliana obeyed, though her legs felt unsteady, her heart torn between fury and something perilously close to desire. She fled the study, the echo of what almost happened burning her more than any cruel word ever had. Behind her, Mitchell pressed the locket to the desk with trembling fingers. His pride screamed at him to harden, to rebuild the wall she had begun to crack. Yet all he could see was her face in the lightning's glow, her quiet strength, her refusal to cower. She haunted him, and he hated it. Far across town, Donovan nursed a glass of wine, a slow smile curling on his lips as his spy reported what he had overheard of Ashbourne's discord. "A duke who dishonors his bride and a duchess forced into silence," Donovan mused. "The court will devour such a tale, and when she tires of his cruelty, I will be there to offer escape." The plot was set in motion. The storm within Ashbourne was no longer only between husband and wife. It now had a rival fanning its flames. If you discovered the cruelty of someone you loved was born from old betrayal, would you show understanding or turn away? The grand banquet at Lord Whitmore's estate was meant to celebrate a successful treaty, but everyone knew it was more than that. It was a stage, a glittering trap where alliances were tested, gossip traded like coin, and reputations sharpened or destroyed. Eliana entered the hall with Mitchell at her side, her gown of emerald silk whispering across polished marble. The chandeliers spilled light over her, catching the pearls at her throat. Outwardly, she was the perfect duchess, poised, graceful, untouchable. But inside, her heart trembled with the memory of the near kiss in Mitchell's study, the locket, the revelation of his old wound. She could not rid herself of the thought that beneath his cruelty there was a man bleeding. And yet he had made no move since. Mitchell, silent and imposing, walked as though armored. His face betrayed nothing. Eliana wondered if he regretted showing her his scars, or if he hated her more for knowing them. Still she stayed, for her family, for the vow she had given herself, that she would not break, no matter how he tried to silence her. Donovan was waiting. He had chosen his moment carefully, prowling the edges of the hall with a smile too sharp to be innocent. When Eliana and Mitchell entered, he bowed with exaggerated grace, his eyes lingering upon her in open admiration. "The Duchess brightens the room more than the chandeliers," he said, his voice pitched to carry. Nobles tittered behind gloved hands, watching for Mitchell's reaction. Mitchell's jaw flexed. He said nothing. Dinner passed in slow, suffocating fragments. Eliana forced herself to eat sparingly, though every bite turned to ash. Mitchell conversed curtly with his allies, his hand never once brushing hers. The distance between them was a chasm, and the court saw it clearly. Donovan, emboldened, waited until wine had loosened tongues and music swelled in the background before he struck. He rose from his seat, goblet in hand, his voice loud enough to silence the laughter around him. "I must speak plainly, for my heart cannot endure the injustice I witness." He turned his gaze to Eliana, his eyes glittering. How cruel it is that such grace, such strength, such beauty should be chained to a man who publicly dishonored her before God and King. Gasps rippled across the tables. The hall fell into a hush broken only by the crackle of torches. Eliana's blood froze. Donovan pressed on, his words sharper than steel. "A duchess such as she deserves devotion, not humiliation. She deserves a husband who sees her worth, not one who drags her name through the mud of his pride. Tell me, friends, is it not a tragedy that she is wasted upon him?" The crowd erupted in murmurs, fans snapping shut, eyes darting between Mitchell and Eliana. Eliana's heart pounded in her chest, her breath shallow. She waited, for Mitchell's voice, for his defense, for him to rise and silence Donovan with the authority only he possessed. This was his chance to prove she was not alone. This was the moment he could show that beneath his pride there was honor enough to protect her. But he said nothing. Mitchell sat, his jaw locked, his hand tightening on the armrest of his chair. His silence roared louder than any words Donovan could have spoken. His pride bound him, the fear of appearing weak before the court freezing his tongue. To defend her would be to admit fault. To admit fault would be to show vulnerability. And Mitchell could not, would not, bend. Eliana's vision blurred, shame and despair flooding her veins. She rose slowly, her chair scraping against the marble. 1,000 eyes followed her. Her voice, though trembling, carried clear across the hall. "You dishonor yourself, my lord, by using my pain as spectacle." She turned her gaze to Donovan first, then to Mitchell. "And you," she whispered, though her words cut like glass, "dishonor me more with your silence than you ever did with your words." With that, she left the table, her skirts trailing like a wound across the floor. The crowd buzzed in her wake. Mitchell remained frozen, his chest heaving, though he forced his face to remain impassive. Lawrence leaned toward him urgently. "Say something, my lord, before the whispers become truth." But Mitchell could not move. His pride held him captive, his fear of humiliation shackling him more tightly than chains. Outside, Eliana fled into the night air. The gardens stretched wide, lit by lanterns fragrant with roses. She clutched at the stone railing, her breath breaking into sobs she had fought for weeks to contain. She had endured humiliation on her wedding night. She had endured whispers, cruelty, silence. But this, his refusal to defend her when Donovan sought to tear her apart before all of England, this was the blow that shattered her. For the first time she considered leaving Ashbourne, leaving the estate, the title, the man who would never see her worth. Even if it meant ruin for her family, even if it meant disgrace, she longed to flee this prison. What good was survival if it stripped her of her soul? Clarine found her in the gardens, wrapping a shawl around her trembling shoulders. "My lady, you must not let them see you fall." Eliana shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "I am already fallen, Clarine. He has cast me down, and I no longer know if I have the strength to rise." Inside the hall, Donovan basked in the murmurs of sympathy, his plan working perfectly. The Duchess had been humiliated, the Duke had revealed his weakness, and the court leaned toward scandal. Soon whispers of annulment would ripple outward, and Donovan would present himself as saviour. Mitchell, alone in the corner, felt the weight of 1,000 eyes judging him. His pride had won the battle, but it left him hollow. Eliana's words replayed in his mind, "Dishonor me more with your silence." For the first time, shame pierced through his armor, but instead of softening him, it drove him deeper into solitude. That night, the carriage ride home was a tomb. Eliana sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the darkness beyond the window. Mitchell sat opposite, his hands clenched in his lap, his tongue a prisoner of fear. He wanted to speak, but pride strangled him. He wanted to say her name, but guilt silenced him. And so they rode in silence, both hearts breaking in the dark. When they reached Ashbourne, Eliana climbed the stairs alone, her figure vanishing into the shadows of the corridor. Mitchell lingered in the hall, staring after her. For the first time he realized the fortress he had built around his heart had not kept her out. It had locked him in. And in his silence, he had lost more than he ever feared. The night closed over them, two souls bound by duty yet torn apart by pride and despair. If the one person meant to protect your honor stood silent as others humiliated you, would you stay, or would you walk away? The following week the Ashbourne estate was quieter than ever. Eliana withdrew into herself, her once bright poise dimmed by despair. She took her meals in her chamber, spoke only to Clarine, and walked the gardens as though the roses themselves might lend her strength. Mitchell noticed every absence, every silence, every hollow space she left behind. And though he told himself he preferred it, less conflict, less chance of seeing the disappointment in her eyes, he felt emptier with each passing day. One evening, a council of nobles gathered at the Marwood Manor. Mitchell attended, his reputation still a shield, though his pride was cracked. He walked among them, cold and commanding, though inside he carried the weight of Eliana's words, "You dishonor me more with your silence." As the night deepened and wine loosened tongues, Mitchell found himself in the shadow of a corridor, half hidden, when he heard the hushed voices of two lords. "She cannot endure much longer," one sneered, his tone sharp with glee. "The Duchess is fragile, and if we press the matter she will break. Once she is discredited, Ashbourne's power will falter. He may be feared, but his Duchess is his weakest link." A cruel laugh followed. Indeed, a wife humiliated at her own wedding, scorned by her husband, and now whispered about at every table. She is ripe for ruin, and when she falls, he will fall with her, the mighty Duke Mitchell, undone by his own bride. Mitchell's blood ran cold. For a moment, the mask he wore slipped, and rage surged like fire in his chest. He had thought himself invulnerable, armored by pride, feared by all. Yet now he understood the truth. Eliana was the keystone. If she fell, he would crumble with her. And the thought of losing her, of seeing her cast down, broken, destroyed, seared through him in a way no betrayal ever had. He left the manor that night with his heart in turmoil, the voices of the nobles echoing in his ears. He could no longer deny it. His cruelty had been his shield, but it had also been his prison. And Eliana, with her quiet strength and unyielding dignity, had haunted him since the moment she first lifted her chin against him. He had scorned her to keep her at bay, but all he had done was wound the one person who had never betrayed him. When he returned to Ashbourne, he did not retreat to his study as usual. Instead, he climbed the stairs to Eliana's chamber. His knock was hesitant, a sound that startled even him. Inside, Eliana sat by the window, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The moonlight spilled over her face, pale and weary. At his presence, she stiffened, her voice cool. "What do you want, my lord?" For a moment, pride urged him to retreat, to cloak himself in cold words and distance, but he pushed it aside, forcing the truth past the walls he had built for years. "I came to apologize." Her head turned sharply, her eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. "Apologize?" Mitchell stepped further into the room, the shadows clinging to his tall frame. "I have wronged you more times than I can count. I humiliated you before all, I scorned you when you sought only survival, and I stood silent when another man sought to ruin you. My silence was worse than his words. I know it." His voice cracked, raw, stripped bare. "You haunt me, Eliana. Every word you've spoken, every look you've given, I cannot escape them. And I do not wish to." Eliana's breath caught, her hands tightening on the fabric of her shawl. For weeks, she had begged for some sign that she mattered to him beyond title and duty. Now the words she had yearned for trembled in the air between them, fragile and uncertain. She rose slowly, her heart pounding. Why tell me this now? He met her gaze, the steel in his eyes softened by vulnerability. "Because I overheard them tonight. The nobles plot to destroy you, to tarnish your name until nothing remains. And I realized..." His voice faltered, then steadied. "If you fall, I fall. Not for power, not for pride, but because I cannot bear to lose you. I thought cruelty would protect me, but all it has done is carve a hollow place where you should have been." Tears stung Eliana's eyes, though she fought to hold them back. "And what am I to do with this confession, Mitchell? You wounded me so deeply, I considered leaving you, leaving Ashbourne, even if it meant ruin. Why should I trust you now?" He stepped closer, his voice low and fervent. "Because I will fight for you this time. Not for appearances, not for pride, for you. I cannot undo the harm I have caused, but I can promise you this. I will not stand silent again." Silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of choices. Eliana studied him, searching for deception, for the pride that had always poisoned his words. But she found only sincerity, raw and unguarded. She exhaled slowly, her voice trembling. "Then prove it. Prove that I am more than a title, more than a pawn. Prove that I matter to you beyond what others see." Mitchell's hand lifted, hesitating before brushing against hers. The touch was tentative, almost reverent, as though he feared she might recoil. When she did not, he clasped her hand gently, the warmth of it grounding him. "You matter more than anything I have left," he whispered. Their eyes locked, the air between them thick with emotion. Slowly, inevitably, they leaned closer, their lips hovering, breaths mingling. Desire and tenderness burned like fire, pulling them toward the kiss that had haunted them both. But again, restraint prevailed. Eliana drew back just before their lips met, her voice soft but resolute. "Not yet. If we are to stand together, it cannot be built on apologies alone. Actions, Mitchell. I need actions." He nodded, his chest tight, his heart both aching and alive in a way it had not been for years. "Then actions you shall have." That night, for the first time, they sat together in quiet conversation. No venom, no barbs, only the fragile beginnings of trust. They spoke of Donovan, of the nobles' schemes, of the battle that awaited them both. By the time the dawn light crept across the floor, they had reached an unspoken vow. They would face it together. Eliana lay in bed after he left, her heart unsteady but hopeful. For the first time since her wedding, she allowed herself to imagine a future where she was not merely enduring, but living, fighting, perhaps even loving. And Mitchell, pacing his study with renewed determination, knew the war had shifted. Donovan would not have her. The court would not ruin her. She was his duchess, and for the first time he understood that meant she was his equal, not his possession. Together, they would defy them all. If someone who had wounded you deeply finally bared their heart and asked for trust, would you risk believing them, or would you walk away? The Grand Council chamber of Hartwell Hall was ablaze with light, chandeliers spilling fire across marble floors. Nobles filled every seat, their silks and jewels gleaming, their whispers slicing sharper than any blade. Tonight, the council convened to settle trade disputes and alliances, but everyone knew the true spectacle was Donovan's trap. He had prepared his strike, and Eliana, Ashbourne's duchess, was his chosen prey. Eliana entered at Mitchell's side, her gown of deep sapphire lending her a dignity she fought to hold. Inside, her pulse raced. She could feel the weight of eyes upon her, measuring, waiting for weakness. Clarine's words from earlier whispered in her mind, "Stand tall, my lady. They can take nothing from you unless you bow." Mitchell's hand rested lightly at her elbow. To others, it was a gesture of control. To her, it was the first touch in weeks that carried something more. A promise made in the quiet hours of dawn, when he vowed he would no longer stand silent. Still, she braced herself. Trust was fragile, and tonight might shatter it beyond repair. The council began, voices droning over ledgers and grain, but the air crackled with anticipation. At last, Donovan rose. His smile was polished, but his eyes glittered with malice. He bowed slightly, then raised his voice. "My lords and ladies, forgive me, for I cannot remain silent while deception festers among us. We speak of honor, of alliances, of trust, but how can we trust a duchess who betrays her vows? The Duchess of Ashbourne consorts with rivals, accepts admiration from men not her husband, and flaunts her charms before all." A wave of gasps swept the chamber. Faces turned toward Eliana, fans stilled mid-motion, whispers rising like storm winds. Eliana's throat closed. For one horrifying moment she relived every wound, the wedding night humiliation, the whispers, the banquet where Donovan had stripped her dignity while Mitchell sat silent. Would it be the same now? Would he remain still while her world crumbled? She straightened, her chin lifted. If she must fall, she would fall with grace. But before she could speak, a chair scraped harshly across the floor. Mitchell rose, His voice cut through the chamber, low but thunderous. Enough. The room stilled. Mitchell stepped forward, his gaze burning into Donovan. You dare stand here and tarnish the name of my Duchess? You dare spit lies before the council as if she were some trinket to be toyed with? His voice grew sharper, each word a blade. Eliana is mine, not as possession but as partner, as Duchess, as heart. Before this council and before God I say it plain, she is the strength of Ashbourne, the one who gives me reason to fight when pride would consume me. Gasps turned to stunned silence. Nobles stared, struck dumb by the icy Duke's confession. Eliana's breath caught, tears stinging her eyes. For the first time, he had named her not as burden or pawn, but as heart. Donovan sneered. Fine words from a man who humiliated her on their wedding night. Shall we forget, my lords, how he turned his back on her before you all? A speech cannot erase shame. Mitchell's jaw hardened. You are right. I wronged her. I was a fool, chained by pride. But I will not wrong her again. And if any man dares question her honour, he will answer to me. The chamber erupted with murmurs, shock rippling like fire. Some nobles nodded in approval, others whispered furiously, but all eyes were locked on the confrontation unfolding. Donovan's mask cracked. His voice rose, sharp and desperate. Then answer me now, Mitchell. You defend her with words, but will you defend her with steel? Will you risk your life for a woman you once scorned? A hush fell. The challenge hung in the air, heavy and brutal. Mitchell stepped closer, his gaze unflinching. Gladly. But know this, Donovan, steel will not save you from what you've already lost. Your schemes are finished. Your allies desert you even now. He glanced toward the nobles, where several had shifted uneasily, unwilling to be tied to Donovan's fall. You have no power here, and you will never touch her again. Donovan's face blanched. He saw it now, the tide turning, whispers curdling against him, his allies slipping away. He had overreached, and Mitchell's open declaration had undone months of careful poison. Desperate, he lunged forward, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. Gasps echoed, guards surged forward, but Mitchell was faster. With one swift motion he seized Donovan's wrist, twisting until steel clattered to the floor. He shoved him back, his voice cold and final. Try again, and I will end you where you stand. The council roared with uproar, some in outrage, others in awe. But the balance had shifted beyond repair. Donovan was dragged from the chamber, his protests drowned by the weight of his defeat. Mitchell turned back. His chest heaved, his hands still trembling with fury, but his gaze softened as it met Eliana's. She stood frozen, her heart pounding, her soul alight with something she had longed to hear but never dared to expect. He crossed the floor, unheeding of the stairs, and stopped before her. His voice lowered, meant only for her, though the chamber strained to hear. Forgive me for every wound I gave you. Forgive me for my silence, my cruelty, my pride. I was blind, but no longer. You are my Duchess, my equal, my heart, and I will spend the rest of my life proving it. Tears spilled down Eliana's cheeks, but they were no longer born of despair. She raised a trembling hand, resting it against his cheek. Do not spend your life proving it, Mitchell. Spend it living it with me. The chamber seemed to vanish as he bent to her, his lips capturing hers in a kiss fierce and desperate, years of ice melting in a single moment. The nobles gasped, some scandalized, others moved, but none could deny what they witnessed. The cruel Duke undone, remade by the woman he once scorned. When at last they broke apart, Mitchell's forehead rested against hers, his voice thick with emotion. Let them whisper what they will. I will not be silent again. Eliana smiled through her tears. Her strength finally met with his. For the first time, she did not stand alone. The council's uproar continued around them, but in that moment Ashbourne's Duchess and her Duke had already won. Together. If the person who once broke your heart redeemed themselves before the world, declaring you as their equal and their love, would you forgive them or guard your heart still? Winter melted into spring, and spring into summer, and with it the cold tension that had once haunted Ashbourne melted as well. The estate, once whispered about for scandal and disgrace, now flourished under the watchful eyes of both Duke and Duchess. Eliana had claimed her place not through Mitchell's name alone, but through her own resilience and grace. Where once noblewomen had whispered and mocked, now they looked to her as a standard of dignity. She managed the estate's affairs with sharp intelligence, restored tenant lands that had languished in neglect, and opened the grand halls for charity gatherings. Children laughed in courtyards that had grown silent, markets bustled with renewed prosperity, and the Ashbourne name, long feared for its ruthless master, was now spoken with respect for its Duchess as well. Mitchell, still proud, still iron-willed, remained the formidable Duke. But something within him had shifted. His pride had not vanished, but it had been tempered, reshaped by the woman who refused to break beneath it. He listened more, spoke with less venom, and where once he stood apart, now he stood with her. The transformation was not instant, nor was it perfect. There were still moments when his temper flared, when the old wounds tugged at him, but time and again, Eliana's steady hand and fierce heart drew him back. And each time he returned, his affection for her grew clearer, his devotion deeper. They became partners in truth. At council gatherings, he would speak with his usual authority, but when Eliana's voice cut through with clarity, he did not silence her. He yielded, surprising the court with his trust in her judgment. It unsettled some, fascinated others, but all saw the truth. The Duchess was no ornament, no pawn. She was Ashbourne's equal and her husband's strength. Whispers transformed into admiration. At soirees and dinners, women spoke of her kindness, her courage, her composure. Men bowed with respect, no longer daring to dismiss her as fragile or expendable. Even those who had once mocked her began to mimic her style, her manner, her quiet authority. She had turned humiliation into triumph, and with it, restored honour not only to herself, but to Mitchell as well. In the privacy of Ashbourne, their relationship deepened. The icy Duke who once turned his back on her now sought her presence, whether in long walks through the rose gardens, evenings by the fire, or the simple comfort of sharing breakfast at dawn. Their quarrels had not vanished, for both were fierce of spirit, but now their arguments burned with passion, often ending in laughter, in closeness, in the kind of intimacy forged through fire. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the horizon, Mitchell found Eliana in the library. She sat by the tall window, a book in her lap, though her gaze was turned outward to the gardens. Her hair, caught by the light, glowed like threads of amber, and the sight of her struck him, as it had begun to do often, an ache in his chest, a realization of how barren his life had been before she filled it. "Eliana," he said quietly. She turned, her lips curving into a smile that still caught him off guard, as if he did not deserve its warmth. "Mitchell!" He crossed to her, the weight of something heavy in his pocket. He had thought long about this moment, about the symbol he carried, and what it meant to finally let it go. He drew the small silver locket from his coat and held it out to her. Her breath stilled. She recognized it at once, the relic of his past, the chain he had clung to, the wound he had once used as his shield. Slowly, she set her book aside and reached for it, her fingers brushing his. "Why are you giving me this?" Mitchell's jaw flexed, but his voice was steady. "Because it no longer belongs to me. I kept it to remind myself never to trust, never to love, never to be cut again, but you—" His eyes burned into hers, fierce and unflinching. "You've undone me. You've broken every wall I built. I no longer need to remember betrayal because you've shown me something stronger. You've shown me love that does not falter, even when tested." Eliana's throat ached. She opened the locket, expecting to see the painted face of his first love, but the portrait was gone. In its place was a lock of her hair, dark and silken, tied with a silver thread. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked back at him. "Mitchell." He lowered to one knee before her, not in formality, but in surrender. "From this day forward, Eliana, it is yours. My heart, my trust, my pride, I lay them all in your hands. No longer will I cling to the past. You are my present, my future, my duchess, my wife, my love." The tears spilled freely now, but her smile broke through them like dawn through clouds. She cupped his face in her hands, pulling him upward. "Then let it be so. Not with chains, not with silence, not with pride, but with us. Together." Their lips met, tender at first, then fierce, a seal upon the vows spoken without ceremony. For the first time, Mitchell kissed her not out of possession or desperation, but out of pure devotion. And for the first time, Eliana kissed him not with resistance, but with acceptance, her heart opening fully to the man who had once been her tormentor, but was now her partner. Time would continue to test them. Whispers would rise and fall, duties would weigh heavily, and the world would never cease to demand their strength. But they had found something unshakable, not perfection, but unity. And in that unity, they had turned humiliation into triumph, cruelty into tenderness, and despair into love. The estate flourished because they flourished. Ashbourne, once a fortress of ice, became a home of warmth. Servants smiled where once they feared, tenants thrived where once they struggled, and nobles bowed not only to the Duke's power but to the Duchess's grace. Together, they had reshaped their world. That night, as they lay together in the quiet of their chamber, the locket resting between them on the nightstand, Eliana whispered against his chest, "Do you ever regret that night, the night you turned your back on me?" Mitchell tightened his arms around her, pressing his lips to her hair. "Every day. But if not for that mistake, I might never have seen how strong you are, how wrong I was, and how much I needed you. So perhaps in some cruel twist, it was the beginning we needed. For I would never value this love so fiercely if I had not almost lost it." Eliana closed her eyes, her heart swelling with peace. For the first time since the chains of marriage had bound her, she felt not trapped, but free. Free in love, in respect, in hope. And as the moonlight bathed them both, the cruel Duke and the scorned bride lay entwined, not as enemies, not as strangers, but as two souls remade. This story closed not with silence, but with hope, redemption, and love fully claimed. Do you believe even the coldest hearts can be transformed by love?